in 1849, when the city of Rome was only 15 years old. God led a small group of families to form what is now called the Pleasant Valley North Church. Zachary Taylor had just been elected President of the United States, and the California gold rush was starting as gold fever began to grip the country. Likely, the first church was a bush arbor. While documentation and photos that existed from those early years have been lost or destroyed, it is possible that the original bush arbor looked like the one in this photograph. All of the materials for the first building were furnished by the people of this community. Worship services were held only once a month in those early years, and the church conference was held the Saturday evening before each service. Regular church attendance was extremely important, and the church flourished through faithful, prayerful participation of its members. As decades passed, the membership continued to grow, so there was a need for a more substantial meeting place. Over time, the original bush arbor had become dilapidated and too small, so it had to be torn down and replaced. The new building opened in 1914 on the eve of World War I. It was the first facility that we have a photo of, and it would be the first upgrade to the church structure in its history. All materials and labors were furnished by members and friends. This structure remained in service for about 27 years, and during this time, electric lights were installed for the first time, and the year was 1937. About 1939, Reverend H.F. Joyner became pastor of PVN. He was also Martha Berry's uncle. It was actually Reverend Joyner's second tenure as PVN's pastor. During this time, a standard Sunday school was also organized for the very first time in our history. And as the church ministry continued to grow, there was once again not enough room for everyone, so PVN considered remodeling the building. There was also a lack of parking space. So to meet these two needs, Charles Harris gave the church 1 acre of land bordering the cemetery and to the south of the then existing sanctuary. A building committee was appointed, and after much discussion, prayer, and financial help from several families, construction finally began as the 1914 sanctuary was torn down. The PVN members met for worship at Glenwood School during this time, and the building was finally completed in 1941. Classrooms were furnished, Sunday school was properly organized, and ironically, this new building would open on the eve of World War II. As the war raged on, it fell upon some, such as Charles Harris, to pay the debt and to help keep the church going as the war efforts drained the church and the community of manpower and resources. As World War II ended and the church moved into the 1950s, growth continued under the leadership of Pastor James Crabb, who served the church for a decade. This was a time of great expansion in America as home ownership increased and automobile travel became mainstream. Initially, Reverend Crabb was pastoring 2 churches at the same time, and PVN's worship services were held only twice a month. PVN and Pastor Crabb felt led to go to weekly services, and so he took on PVN as his only church. And soon, this led to a need for a new educational building as church growth continued to happen. So construction began in the fall of 1958, and the building would be dedicated on June 14, 1959. Some 20 years later, in the fall of 1979, a note burning was held to celebrate the completion of paying off the debt of the education building. As PVN celebrated this milestone, the growth of the church in both membership and ministries had surely reached far beyond anything the church founders had envisioned in their earlier years. By 1980, PVN had grown to a membership of over 500 members. Ministries such as the adult choir, WMU, men's brotherhood, and youth children's programs were flourishing. This continued growth led to a need for yet more space and a larger sanctuary space. So the auditorium was expanded in 1987 and additional seating as well as a vestibule was added. An office wing and a fellowship hall were also an important part of this building process. In the 1990s, Pleasant Valley continued to establish itself as a pillar in the Armitage community. The slogan, "Reaching Families and Meeting Needs," became the established vision of the church. It was even emblazoned at the main entry of the education building at that time. It was in November of 2001 that our current pastor, Mac McCurry, was called to the church to lead us into the 21st century. By the mid-2000s, church growth was rapid. The existing sanctuary reached its capacity and a second worship service was established. The time soon arrived for the congregation to decide on a vision for the future of PVN. So after much planning and prayer, the members embarked on a building campaign unlike any other in the history of our church. The sanctuary where you are sitting this morning is a testament to the growth of the church, God's faithfulness, and the courage of the church members to step out in faith and follow the Lord's leading. The first service in this sanctuary was in October of 2006. God continued to bless PVN. Sunday morning worship services would go back to 2 services once again by 2011. As more people attended and more ministries were started, the church's growth continued to the point of needing more room for education and for fellowship. So in August of 2014, church members gathered on a Sunday evening to celebrate yet another note burning for the sanctuary and to break ground for a new Christian Life building at the same time. Today, this 2-story building includes a large fellowship hall and 12 classrooms, and it has become the center for fellowship and Christian education in the lives of the PVN members. The space not only hosts ministries for the church several times each week, but has become a valuable outreach to the surrounding community as well. Amazingly, with God's help and the faithful generosity of the church family, the debt on this Christian Life building was retired in a very short time, and the church celebrated a note burning on the first Sunday in January of 2020. PVN has seen a lot of change in its 175 years. From arriving at a church in a horse and buggy to arriving in an automobile, to worshiping outdoors with no electricity, to worshiping with the modern conventions of life. This church has remained steadfast in our mission to reach, teach, sow, and grow. On this Sunday before Thanksgiving, may we give thanks to the Lord for His faithfulness, and may we count our blessings. Let's take time this morning to celebrate our rich history while also looking forward to the wonderful future the Lord has in store for His people here at PVN.